founder of Rural Media back in 1992, which employs 20 staff and works with the public sector, the voluntary sector, universities, trusts and charities. And many of you may remember the experiment that the BBC did in Hereford and Worcester a few years ago, which was subsequently abandoned. Nick has some knowledge on that. Where is he? You're there.
Somewhat soaked and breathless.
We'll give you a couple of minutes. Are you all right to start now?
I'm all right, yes. Yeah.
Good. Do come and join us. You're drenched.
Absolutely. Come to London and expect it to be warm. Right, hello. Yes, I mean, Steve just asked me if I would say a little bit about our experience of working with the BBC on the local TV pilot. Just hands up, how many people heard of that pilot? Quite a few, and followed it to a certain extent.
The BJTC did in fact have a demonstration of it.
Yeah, right, yeah, and that's probably Dan Colesworth or someone.
Nigel.
Right.
Nigel.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, well the pilot was, it was started in 2005, I think. It the West Midlands was chosen to be the pilot area. I'm not quite sure what the actual BBC committed to the budget. I think it was something in the region of 3 million in all that they say that they found from savings at the time. And the pilot was to be delivered as a 10-minute either opt-out on the BBC, on the Sky satellite, on BBC One, and as and to be available broadcast on BBC websites through the local TV pages. The pilot was to run for 9 months, and it was really obviously a test for what ultimately became the report that went to the public value test and failed. It was going to be delivered on the footprint of local radio stations. So that was the 5-6 local stations in the West Midlands. Hereford and Worcester, obviously no longer, now divorced as 2 counties, but back then was still one county, and obviously the BBC local radio station is still BBC Hereford and Worcester, was our most local radio station in which the pilot was going to be focused. Herefordshire always seems to get a poor crack of the whip. It's very much a minor player. It's much more sparsely populated, very rural county between the 2 counties. And in terms of broadcasting, as indeed in most other things, most services, it gets a very poor crack of the whip. So when we heard about the pilot, we approached the BBC as a local independent media charity and said, well, look, in fact, we started talking to researchers who've been out and about for a few weeks. I think sort of had that extraordinary, really, given the the development and the commitment to resources and the profile that the pilot had within the BBC. Fairly extraordinary, possibly misjudgment, but there was got a strong sense that was a judgment that there was just lots of content out there, all just waiting really to be sort of curated and aggregated and then broadcast. After talking to researchers for a couple of weeks, they realised that actually there wasn't that much content, and certainly there wasn't that much content that was usable in any way. Really a bit like I think sort of video diaries some years before it realised that there was actually going to be, although possibly a very cheap production method or cheap content, if not indeed free, there was going to be a great deal more time and cost involved in post to get that content into any usable shape. So we proposed to the BBC that we acted as a broker for facilitating, enabling programming from Herefordshire particularly. and we negotiated a contract with them to do that. The result was that we, over it wasn't quite 9 months by the time we got going, I think it was probably about 8 months, we produced 60 and enabled 60 short films to be produced. And the idea was that the pilot was going to be a 10 minutes daily refreshed service that you could obviously get to from your splash screen from your local area. And about 7 or 8 minutes of that was going to be local news, ultra-local news, which the BBC was still going to produce themselves, and the rest was going to be community content. And that's the bit that we came into. I think we were the only organisation that was, and part of the pilot was to see what would happen if the BBC partnered with a media organisation that was very close to the ground, and yet had the capacity and the expertise and the ethos to work in a participatory and enabling way with local communities. So once having agreed that, we then, from being a largely grant-aided media charity, it was our first experience of some sort of volume production, and we had to establish some systems to cope with that. We also then had to market and alert the 170,000 people in Herefordshire that this opportunity existed. It didn't sound very much really. 10 minutes a day doesn't sound very much for a single county. But in fact, when it's daily refreshed, having 60 or 70 minutes of local news and local content actually was quite a lot. And a lot of people commented on the fact that to start with it sounded sort of completely tokenistic and would disappear below the horizon. In fact, actually, our experience of and our understanding from communities we work with that it was actually seen as quite significant. That's how representing how paucity of local communications and sort of news generally across the landscape. We then had to try and get the word out. That was immediately a problem because our local newspaper, which is a NewsQuest published newspaper, was very much opposed to the pilot, and some of you I'm sure will know that the leading the charge really against the local TV pilot was the Newspaper Society, and the editor, local editor at the time, was very much upholding that line. That in itself was interesting in that we realised just what a local monopoly really on communications in our county the one single newspaper had, because once the newspaper refused to carry any notices or anything, and this was not without a good deal of meetings, negotiations, pleading by both myself and by David Holmes from the BBC. There was still really a refusal to carry any recognition of it, even as we progressed, even when important local stories were being carried, or indeed the kind of content which you would imagine a local paper would carry, like sort of a programme of day of the life of the local mayor or what have you. So that was a real challenge. Having said that, having said that, Rural Media had been working in that county for, at that time, about 17 years, 16, 17 years, and we knew have a very extensive network, and so we were able to put that word out. We set up a Tuesday evening ideas, an open house, some afternoon editing, post-production, and set up systems by which we could access cameras and so on. The response was pretty remarkable, and just to give you a sort of flavour of that, as I say, 60 programmes were produced, extraordinary range of content. Just did a little summary here of there was certainly a lot of testimony and people's lives and work and so on featured. Leisure and hobbies featured very strongly, and then some student work as well, which was a little bit more experimental, and which we had to negotiate quite hard with the BBC to see as valid content, because it didn't have quite the same sort of narrative drive that they expected. We worked with about 70 local people, filmmakers. All of those people certainly developed their media literacy skills, their critical reading of media, and understanding how broadcast works. But then many of those also developed scripting, production, and post-production skills as well. And lots of surprises. You know, some films that we really thought were, even in our terms, possibly not suitable for going out, suddenly became cult films and huge followings, and so on. So it was really unsurprising. The overall evaluation, which is done by Professor Lawton, and I think the report, for those of you who haven't seen it, is still on the BBC website. It's still interesting reading even now, in fact, it's even more particularly now. And you can read in that report the assessment, the evaluation of the partnership with an organisation, with Rural Media Company, but as an organisation that was community content was outsourced to. And there is also, I can provide a report for that project if anyone would be interested, and also maybe a couple of examples of films. And questions in due course.
Questions?
Thank you very much indeed.